The space I want to take you in today is an unusual one, I think. For some people, it will be very familiar, and some people, it will be completely unfamiliar. For some people, well, they may even have a viewpoint on it, something like this. This is the opinion of my Year 10 English teacher. I vividly remember it, and I think most people who play and even frankly work in video games probably have heard this at some point. And it's very much a thing where sort of, they're saying, this is a time suck, why are you doing this? And it's really interesting because I'm going to argue today that far from being a waste of time, they're actually a beacon. They're a really interesting, disruptive, and disrupting industry. And they're an example of a space where rethinking long-held paradigms can yield solutions to big problems that otherwise seem relatively intractable, and more on one of those in a moment. I started in film. It was entirely film-based in the early part of my career, working with a composer called Harry Gregson Williams. And we got to work with some amazing directors over the years, and I was very much learning from Harry how to score a film, how to work with a director, how to respond to an emotional brief. And really, music is the emotional backbone, as everyone probably knows, of a lot of these kinds of media properties. We really are the sort of the glue that glues it emotionally together. We got to work with people like Jim Cameron, Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, and a huge number of really interesting filmmakers. And Harry, by the way, Harry's work is fantastic, and you should absolutely seek it out if you know stuff like The Chronicles of Narnia. Amazing scores. One day, a few years into my working with Harry, he called me and he said, there's a job I've been called about, but I definitely can't do it. And you have to understand, Harry's not a gamer. Definitely not a gamer. But he's worked on a number of very, very high-profile video game soundtracks. But he called me and said, there's this thing, it's called Call of Duty? You also have to remember at this time, games weren't really even a second-class citizen for a composer. They're a third-class citizen at best, maybe even lower than that. Film was what everyone wants to do. Television, maybe a little lower, and then video games was somewhere down here. They didn't have the huge budgets they had today, and they were very much a sort of, seen as a sort of, a lesser art form, like sort of. And I once had an engineer, say, member of the Recording Academy, when we were starting to put together the Grammy category, which we now have for video game music, and he said, oh, it's just bleeps and bloops. It's not. We'll get to that in a moment. Call of Duty was the very first game I worked on and scored on my own, and it was released in 2007. It sold 16 million copies, but what it did, and we sort of realized it was going to do it at the time when we were making it, because it was blatantly obvious, was it was a really big cultural moment, because it marked a point at which we could really tell hugely emotional stories, really big emotional stories. A video game could make you cry. That was the idea. We were like really just moving beyond just moving stuff around on a screen and shooting stuff to actually telling emotional stories. The director of this game said he wanted a playable Jerry Bruckheimer movie. It was about 2007, so that was kind of where they were going for. They wanted to literally be able to play, a Jerry Bruckheimer or Tony Scott kind of movie. That's the idea. I've gotten to write music for an audience of effectively billions, which is an immense privilege. Apex Legends alone, we're up to our 29th season. We have 300 million registered players. And through all of these projects, I've found that video games are not a waste of time. They're an amazing art form for lots and lots of reasons, but particularly the biggest one is, well, the three big ones. Firstly, we have a big canvas, so we have 30 hours to tell a story, 40 hours. Some games you might even have 100 hours to tell a story, which is often impossible in any other medium, except for maybe the longest of long-form television. We differ from any other medium in that the player has agency. They get to choose the story to some degree. Sometimes they get to choose the story to a huge degree. Open world games, they can literally walk wherever they want. And so for the music side of things, this presents a huge challenge. We're a non-linear medium. We don't know what the player is going to do. And that on its face might sound like the worst possible situation to be writing music for, because music is a very linear thing. So in terms of the evolution of video game music, what you have to think about is it's a very young industry, about 40 years old, 50 years old, really, and only in the last 20 years have we had what we know today. We started out sort of in the chip era with Super Mario Brothers composers like Koji Kondo, figuring out solutions to problems where they had literally just a few kilobytes of memory, and they literally created music with those 5, 6, 7 kilobytes of memory sometimes, that amount, which has created music that's still culturally relevant today. Probably a lot of you, if I said the Super Mario Brothers theme, it's now going around in your head. And I apologize for that, because it's now going to be going around your head for the rest of this talk. But, the CD era followed after that. We were able to put music which played directly off the disc. So that became something where we were able to have full resolution audio, full orchestral score. And then the revolution really came in around 2000, 2005 between there. It sort of was a slow revolution, but it really sort of emerged around when Call of Duty came out, which was the ability to have fully dynamic music. We can effectively have music in permanent readiness. The idea is that we can loop, we can layer, we can transition between different pieces of music, all on the fly. The game is literally DJing the music on the fly in a lot of these games, depending on what the player does, and making that not feel mechanical, making that not feel like a bad football commentator is sort of the idea that we're going for, trying to make it feel like you're playing something linear that is fundamentally not linear. Film effectively lives in time. You have a time frame. Game music, the space of game music is possibility space. We have all these possibilities of what the player can do, and our problem that we have to solve is how do we get something that doesn't feel mechanical but does feel human, emotional, and actually aids the storytelling, which is ultimately, with most of these games now, really is the core of it's a storytelling medium. So to give you an example of the kind of brief that I get as a composer, this is one from just a couple of years ago. This is a real one. From Apex Legends. This is a character, and in every Apex we have every character has their own theme. And it'll literally be, so this chap, Revenant, he's not the friendliest of people, as you might be able to guess. He's a simulacrum. He's part man, part machine. He's an assassin. He's very, very fast, but also quite sort of stealthy and light on his feet, and then can also be a sort of unstoppable force and be slow, sort of like tank-like as well. And so the director comes to me and says, like, really what we want to do is we want an unmistakable sonic identity for this character, so that when you have the music playing and you're almost not looking at the screen, we actually know which character we're talking about. There were no real courses that taught any of this, and frankly, there still really aren't. There's a couple which sort of delve into it. Berkeley and Boston is one. There's a little bit of the Guildhall here, and a few of the other media music courses just touch on it, but it really isn't taught anywhere. And that sort of gets to the deeper point. The game industry is worth around $7 billion to the UK economy. It's 76,000 jobs. The music is around 220,000 jobs. So 300,000 jobs of these two industries together. But the underpinning of all of this is basically in a slow collapse, and it's not being talked about. Music education in this country is in unbelievably poor state. A-level this year, you're looking at certainly less than 5,000. We think it may possibly be less than 4,000 people taking the A-level. That's 4,000, which is an incredibly small number. There are music hubs that were set up in the early 2000s. There used to be 116 of them. There are now 43. That's literally happened in the last 3 years. So what they've done is they've consolidated a lot of them, but unfortunately there's 161 million pounds, not billion pounds, 161 million pound black hole in the financing. If you go to an independent school, you're about 50% chance that you're going to get sustained music tuition. If you're at a state school, you've got about a 15% chance. And literally at the point right now, it's really only if you're rich, frankly. It's the preserve of only those who can afford it. It's also not only a funding crisis, it's a relevance crisis. Every one of these genres was invented in the UK, every single one of them. And some of them may surprise you, but absolutely, you can Google, absolutely every one of these genres is a British invention, effectively, and then went out, exported out. All of them are based in technology, largely. They're all based in digital audio workstations. Only 6% of UK schools, of all UK schools, have any kind of music technology whatsoever, and it's about 3% if you're looking at sort of actually a decent sort of recording studio with which you could do anything. And here's the thing, is that music, the way we teach it is sort of wrong-headed. We think about music theory backwards. There's a fantastic TEDx talk by a chap called Victor Wooten who talks about how music theory is backwards. We talk about scales before we talk about songs. We talk about arpeggios before we talk about expression. We effectively make kids learn the grammar of music before we ever let them converse with the language of music. Because it's like, here's all this theory you have to learn. If we taught language that way, you'd have a toddler trying to like conjugate verbs before they babbled. I mean, it's an insane way of teaching what is effectively a language. The best way to join in musical conversation in the 21st century is absolutely through technology that creates music that's actually relevant to what kids are listening to, which a lot of the time is video game music. Production, we can teach that through music technology. You don't have to learn what 4/4 is from Eine kleine Nachtmusik. You can absolutely learn it from like programming music into a digital audio workstation. There's no difference. It's the same fundamental building blocks. It's the idea that we can play. We can teach like language, immersion, play, make mistakes in real time. And the technology is already there. When I started out, it used to be that you had a real problem where it was cost tens of thousands of pounds to put a studio together. Today, you can do it for free. And here's the key thing that I'm sort of going to get at today, which is that this absolutely should happen. But my point is that all of this software is free, but is it actually good enough? Can you use this in a professional way? And so what I'm going to do is take my world of video game music and use free software and free tools, and the only thing is just one iPad. That's the only purchased thing, and the cheapest MIDI keyboard. It costs about 30 quid, and a cheap pair of headphones. And I'm going to go back to a brief that we just saw, and this is what we're going to do today. So this afternoon, I'm going to miss a few talks. I'm going to be sitting in another room, and we're going to do this. I'm going to quickly ask a few questions about what we're going to do, because you're going to be the game director today. Also, so you know I'm not cheating as well. So we'll get the brief from the room. So let me ask three quick questions. I'd love to ask, just shout out, is there any genres or artists that this guy reminds you of or makes you think of? Just first thoughts, anybody? Heavy metal, great. Any others? Linkin Park, that's great. Awesome, okay. Let's have a 50-50 show of hands. So he can be very, very fast. He's a very sort of, but he can also be a slow character, sort of tank-like character. So should we go fast or slow? So put your hand up if you think fast. Oh, it's pretty even. And put your hand up if you think slow. I think the fast takes it. And lastly, just shout out any instruments or textures or sounds, or like any of the other things, like if it's, it could be piano or anything, just shout out any instruments you can think of. Okay, French horn, that's a great one. Steel drums, ooh, yeah, metal, we'll give it a go. What, fantastic. What I'm going to aim to prove, and I'm going to come back at the beginning of the third block, and I'm going to have a piece of music to play you based on that brief, and aim to show you that the tools that are out there now can be used to do professional level work and are absolutely good enough, and it's something that we should be deploying. Thank you very much. Okay, so 3 hours, roughly, 2.5, give or take. Almost 95% on Garage. I keep saying GarageBand. GarageBand. I've been in America too long. GarageBand, and all free sounds. Everything you're about to hear. Nothing costs money. So the takeaway and the conclusion really is that music technology, rather like video games, has developed unbelievably quickly over the last 20 years. None of it's in the classroom, and it should be. And so we need to make sure that it is. Thank you very much.